The morning I woke up alone, my phone was already vibrating. At first I thought it was him, a late apology, a joke, something stupid and forgivable. Instead, it was a bank notification, then another, and another. By the time I sat up in bed, the account balance that held our entire life together was nearly zero. My name is Emily, and the man I trusted with my future disappeared before sunrise. If you're listening to this and thinking you'd never miss the signs, stay with me. I thought the same thing. I met Daniel when we were both broke enough to count groceries in our heads. He was charming in a quiet way, not loud, not flashy. The kind of man who made you feel safe just by standing next to you. We talked about building something together, not getting rich, just stable, predictable, ours. The company started small, a logistics firm he pitched as his dream, but I was the one who handled the paperwork, the filings, the late nights balancing numbers while he slept. He called me his anchor. I believed him. When we married, we combined everything. One savings account, one vision, one future, or so I thought. The first sign came a year before he ran. He stopped asking my opinion. Not directly. It was subtle. Decisions already made, contracts already signed. When I questioned him, he smiled and said I worry too much. I told myself that was marriage, compromise, trust. The second sign was the silence. He started coming home later, not smelling like perfume or lies, just distant, like his mind had already packed its bags. The night before he disappeared, he kissed my forehead and told me he loved me. I remember because it felt rehearsed. The next morning, his side of the closet was empty. No note, no message. Just a drained account and a quiet house that suddenly felt enormous. Friends told me to call the police. His brother said Daniel probably needed space. My mother asked what I did wrong. No one asked what he planned. I didn't cry that day. I logged into the company portal instead. That's when I remembered something Daniel had long forgotten. I had always been the one who read the fine print. Not because I was suspicious, but because someone had to. Daniel hated details. He liked vision, momentum, the feeling of things moving forward. I liked knowing exactly where the floor was before I stepped. When we formed the company, his lawyer suggested a simple split, 50-50. Daniel waved it off and said we were married, so it didn't matter. The lawyer insisted it did. I remember Daniel rolling his eyes and telling me to just sign whatever kept things moving. What I signed was not what he remembered. The shares were divided, but the voting rights were not equal. My name was listed as the controlling shareholder in the event of absence, incapacity, or breach of fiduciary duty. At the time, it felt like paperwork. Boring, protective, the kind of thing you hope never matters. Sitting alone in our kitchen, staring at the empty chair across from me, it mattered. I didn't rush. That surprised everyone later, but it made sense to me. Panic makes noise. Noise warns people. I needed quiet. I called the company's attorney, not Daniel's friend, the firm's attorney. I asked a single question. Had any shares been transferred in the last 6 months? The answer was no. Daniel had been careful with cash, not ownership. That told me something important. He didn't plan to burn the company down. He planned to use it. Over the next week, I learned how far he'd gone. He'd opened new accounts under shell entities. He'd leveraged company credit lines without my knowledge. Not illegally, but aggressively, like someone who thought they'd never have to answer questions again. Employees started calling me confused. Vendors, too. Daniel had stopped responding. His name was still on contracts, but his voice was gone. I showed up at the office on a Tuesday morning. People looked shocked. Some looked relieved. No one looked angry. That was the first real confirmation that I wasn't the villain in this story. I didn't announce anything. I didn't make speeches. I asked for reports. I asked for timelines. I asked who had access to what. By the end of the day, I knew exactly how fragile Daniel's escape plan was. Money disappears quickly when it's stolen. It disappears even faster when people are looking for it. 2 weeks after he vanished, I got my first message. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a lie. It was a question. Why are vendors calling me? I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. Then I typed a single sentence. Because you're still responsible. He didn't reply. The next message came days later, angrier, accusatory. He said I was sabotaging him, that I was turning people against him, that I was trying to ruin what he built. I didn't correct him. Instead, I filed paperwork. As controlling shareholder, I had the authority to call an emergency board meeting. The board was small, mostly advisors, people who respected numbers more than drama. I presented facts: cash withdrawals, unauthorized leverage, abandonment of duties, risk exposure. No emotion, no marriage talk, just business. By the end of that meeting, Daniel was removed from operational control pending review. I went home that night and sat on the floor of our bedroom. That was the first time I cried. Not because I missed him, but because I finally understood how thoroughly he'd underestimated me. He thought draining the savings would empty me. He didn't realize the savings were never the real asset. The company was. Weeks passed. His messages shifted tone. From anger to bargaining. From blame to nostalgia. He reminded me of our early days. The apartment with the broken heater. The nights we planned everything on napkins. I didn't block him, I let him talk. People reveal their strategy when they think they're losing. Eventually, he told me where he was. Not directly, but enough hints. Enough arrogance. He still believed he could charm his way back into control. That I'd fold once things got uncomfortable. What he didn't know was that discomfort had already passed. I was calm now. The review concluded faster than expected. Financial misconduct, breach of duty, clear intent to extract value and abandon responsibility. The board voted unanimously. Daniel was out. Not suspended, not sidelined, removed. I signed the final document with a steady hand. The next message I sent him was longer than the others. I told him the truth, not all of it, just the part that mattered. That the company no longer belonged to him. That his shares were frozen pending litigation, that the life he ran from was still standing, and the one he ran toward was about to collapse. He didn't reply. 3 days later, his lawyer did. That's when I knew the power had fully shifted. His lawyer's email was polite, almost friendly. That was the first mistake. It opened with concern for my well-being, acknowledged the emotional strain of marital conflict, and suggested a mutually respectful path forward. I read it twice, not for content, but for tone. Every sentence assumed I was reacting, not acting, that I was hurt, confused, and waiting to be guided back to reason. I forwarded it to my attorney without comment. What followed was not dramatic. It was procedural, quiet, relentless. We requested a full forensic audit. Not because I needed proof, but because the process itself would tighten the net. Daniel's withdrawals were mapped, his shell accounts flagged, every leveraged dollar traced back to his authorization. The deeper we went, the more obvious his panic became. He began calling, not texting, calling. I let it ring the first few times. Then I answered. He sounded thinner, sharper, like a man trying to keep his balance on something already falling. He said he never meant to hurt me, that he just needed time, space, that I wouldn't understand the pressure he was under. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I asked him one question. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Silence followed, long enough to feel intentional. Then he laughed softly and said he thought I'd forgive him, that I always had before. That was when I understood the real betrayal. He hadn't just stolen money. He'd built his entire exit plan on my predictability. The audit results landed 2 weeks later. They were devastating. Not criminal enough for prison, but civilly catastrophic. Breach of fiduciary duty, self-dealing, material misrepresentation to lenders, The kind of findings that don't make headlines but quietly erase credibility. We moved forward with litigation. Daniel's lawyer changed tone immediately. The warmth vanished. The language hardened. Deadlines, threats, warnings about reputational harm. I didn't flinch. Every threat assumed I wanted to protect the marriage's image, that I feared exposure, that shame would make me negotiate. They were wrong. What I feared was letting him believe he could do this to me and walk away intact. The company stabilized faster than expected. Employees adjusted. Clients stayed. Revenue dipped, then recovered. People trust consistency more than charisma, and Daniel had taken his charisma with him. I became the constant. That bothered him more than losing money. He sent one last personal message late one night. No lawyers, no strategy, just anger stripped of polish. He said I was vindictive, that I was enjoying this, that I'd turned into someone cold. I replied with honesty. I said I was enjoying clarity. Months passed. The court date approached. His legal team pushed for settlement. Quiet terms, mutual non-disclosure, a clean separation. I agreed to talk. We met in a conference room that smelled like coffee and old paper. Daniel looked older, not ruined, just exposed. The version of him that never thought he'd have to explain himself. He avoided my eyes. The mediator laid out options, numbers, percentages, time frames. Daniel finally spoke. He asked me what I wanted. The room went still. I told him I wanted exactly what the documents already said I was entitled to. Control, restitution, and acknowledgement in writing that his departure was voluntary and financially motivated. He looked up then, shocked. He said that would destroy his reputation. I told him he'd already done that. I was just formalizing it. The settlement was signed 3 weeks later. Daniel received a payout far smaller than he expected. Enough to survive, not enough to rebuild power. The company remained mine. The house was sold. The savings he drained were replaced slowly, steadily, without drama. The strangest part came afterward. The quiet. No more messages, no more legal threats, just distance. One afternoon, months later, I received a notification. Daniel had updated his professional profile. New venture, new city, same confidence. I closed the app without reacting. People ask me now if I feel satisfied, if the revenge felt good. I don't think of it as revenge. I think of it as correction. He assumed control belonged to the loudest voice, the boldest move, the fastest exit. He forgot about the person who stayed behind and kept the lights on. He forgot about me. And that was his most expensive mistake. There's a moment people don't talk about after everything is over, after the lawyers stop calling, after the paperwork is filed, after the story stops being interesting to anyone except the person who lived it. That's the moment when you're left alone with who you became. For a long time, I worried I'd turned into someone I wouldn't recognize, someone colder, sharper, too controlled. But the truth settled in slowly, the way real understanding does. I didn't change. I stopped compensating. Before Daniel left, I softened everything. I translated his moods. I explained his absences. I made his risks sound smaller so everyone else could breathe easier, including him. After he ran, there was no one left to manage but myself. The company grew, not explosively, responsibly. We dropped projects that looked impressive but bled cash. We focused on the work that lasted, the kind that doesn't make noise but pays salaries on time. People started calling me decisive, strategic, strong. They never used those words before. One afternoon, nearly a year after the settlement, I ran into Daniel's brother at a cafe. He hesitated when he saw me, like he wasn't sure which version of me he'd get. He told me Daniel talks about me sometimes, not with anger, with confusion. He doesn't understand how I did it, how I moved on so completely, how I rebuilt without looking back. I didn't explain, because the truth is simple and it's not flattering to him. I didn't rebuild my life. I reclaimed it. Daniel thought money was freedom. that if he grabbed enough of it fast enough, consequences couldn't catch him. He thought love meant loyalty without limits, forgiveness without memory. He never understood that the real leverage was never emotional. It was structural. I didn't win because I was smarter. I won because I stayed present. I read what he ignored. I planned for what he dismissed. I protected what he assumed would always be there. People love stories where someone snaps, where revenge is loud and immediate and messy. This wasn't that. This was quiet alignment. By the time Daniel realized the power had shifted, it was already documented, approved, and irreversible. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the version of me he left behind, the woman who would have begged him to explain, to come back, to fix it. I feel tenderness toward her. She didn't know yet that survival doesn't always look like endurance. Sometimes it looks like letting someone walk away with exactly what they asked for. Distance. If you're listening to this and you're in the middle of betrayal, here's what I want you to hear. Don't rush to be understood. Don't rush to be fair. Don't rush to be loud. Look at what you actually hold. Not emotionally, not morally, legally, practically, structurally. That's where real outcomes live. Daniel wanted a clean escape. He wanted to vanish with a story where he was brave and misunderstood. What he got was something quieter. A future where his name is footnote instead of headline, where his confidence has no foundation, where every new beginning starts with explaining what happened before. I don't follow his life. I don't need to. The best part of taking control is not having to watch what falls apart behind you. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or treated like the silent half of a partnership, stay here. Subscribe to Revenge Reels. These stories aren't about cruelty. They're about clarity, about consequences that make sense, about the kind of justice that doesn't shout but lasts. In the next story, you'll hear about a son who signed away his inheritance without realizing who held the real authority. That one ends differently. And if you think power always looks obvious, you're going to want to hear how that mistake played out.